White mayor cheats black homeless man. 2 years later, he becomes the new mayor. The crowd roared in disbelief. Standing on the podium was Gregory Carter, the man everyone had dismissed 2 years ago as just another face in the sea of the forgotten. Gregory adjusted the mayoral sash over his shoulders, his brown skin glowing under the harsh lights of City Hall. Across the room, seated stiffly in the audience, was the former mayor, Richard Hayes. His pale face was ashen, eyes darting nervously as he avoided Gregory's gaze. The irony was palpable, almost cinematic. 2 years ago, Richard had orchestrated Gregory's public humiliation, stripping him of dignity and trust. And now, the very man he had cheated stood tall, the city's new leader. The room fell silent as Gregory leaned toward the microphone. "Mr. Hayes," he began, his deep voice steady, "you didn't think I'd make it here, did you?" The audience gasped. Richard shifted uncomfortably in his seat, beads of sweat forming on his temple. Gregory's pause stretched long enough to feel like eternity. "I never forgot what you did," Gregory continued, eyes narrowing. "And I'm sure you haven't either." The tension in the room was suffocating. What had Richard done? How had Gregory, once homeless, risen to this position of power? The answer was buried in the events of 2 years prior, a story that began with betrayal and ended with triumph. 2 years earlier, Gregory Carter sat on the cold sidewalk outside City Hall, clutching a cardboard sign. His hair was unkempt, and his clothes were frayed, but his eyes carried a glimmer of hope. The sign read, "Will work for food." Gregory had always been a hard worker, but life had dealt him blow after blow. A factory closure had left him jobless, and soon after, medical bills from an accident swallowed up his savings. With no family to lean on, he found himself on the streets of Meadowbrook, a small but bustling town with little patience for its homeless population. Mayor Richard Hayes, a man known for his polished image and empty promises, was running for re-election. His campaign focused on cleaning up the streets, a not-so-subtle jab at people like Gregory. But one chilly autumn afternoon, fate brought Gregory and Richard face to face. Richard stepped out of City Hall with his assistant, Susan, trailing behind. His campaign photographer was snapping pictures for a photo op spotting Gregory. Richard's lips curled into a calculated smile. "Perfect," Richard said, gesturing toward Gregory. He approached with an air of condescension, crouching down to Gregory's level. "What's your name, sir?" Gregory squinted up at him, unsure how to respond. "Gregory," he mumbled. "Well, Gregory," Richard said, raising his voice so the photographer could hear, "I believe everyone deserves a second chance. How about this? You work for me for a week, and I'll make sure you get back on your feet." The offer sounded too good to be true, but Gregory was desperate. He nodded, feeling a flicker of hope. The following week, Gregory worked tirelessly. Richard had him cleaning campaign offices, delivering flyers, and even running personal errands. Gregory didn't mind the work, it gave him purpose. At the end of the week, he approached Richard, hopeful for the promised reward. Instead, Richard laughed in his face. "Oh, Gregory," he said, his tone dripping with mockery. "You really thought I was serious? It was just a campaign stunt. But thanks for your help." Gregory's stomach dropped. "But you said—" "I said what I needed to say," Richard interrupted, his smile cruel. "Now get off my property before I call security." Humiliated and heartbroken, Gregory returned to the streets. But this time, anger fueled him. He refused to let Richard's betrayal define him. He started visiting the public library daily, learning about politics and government. He shared his story with anyone who would listen, gaining allies in unexpected places. One of those allies was Martha Jennings, a retired lawyer who had grown disillusioned with the town's leadership. She saw potential in Gregory and encouraged him to run for office. The idea seemed absurd at first. How could a homeless man with no resources take on someone as powerful as Richard Hayes? But Gregory was determined. He rallied a grassroots campaign, focusing on issues that mattered to the people: affordable housing, healthcare, and education. Slowly, his message began to resonate. People who had ignored him on the streets now saw him as a voice for change. As election day approached, Richard grew nervous. His polished image began to crack under the weight of scandals Gregory's team unearthed. But Richard was a seasoned politician, and he wasn't going down without a fight. Election night was a whirlwind. Votes poured in, and the gap between Gregory and Richard narrowed with each passing hour. Finally, the results were announced. Gregory Carter was the new mayor of Meadowbrook. Back at the podium, Gregory stared down Richard. "You cheated me," he said, his voice steady but charged with emotion. "But you underestimated me." Richard's face darkened, but he said nothing. The audience erupted into applause, their cheers echoing through the room. Gregory had won, but his journey was far from over. What would he do now that he held the power? And how would Richard retaliate? The applause in the hall finally died down as Gregory Carter took a step back from the podium. He surveyed the crowd. Some were beaming with pride, others looked skeptical. At the back of the room, Richard Hayes had slipped out, avoiding the reporters who were already circling like vultures. Gregory exhaled, his grip on the podium tightening. The victory was sweet, but the weight of what lay ahead was heavy. Meadowbrook was a fractured town, and its people were counting on him to deliver real change. He knew this was just the beginning of a long and grueling fight. The journey to that night had not been smooth. After announcing his candidacy, Gregory faced relentless mockery. Social media was flooded with cruel memes, dubbing him Mayor Cardboard because of his time on the streets. Richard Hayes, ever the manipulator, played up the narrative that Gregory was unfit to lead. During one debate, Richard leaned into his podium with a smirk. "Mr. Carter," he said, his voice dripping with disdain, "you've never held a job that required you to make decisions for more than yourself. What makes you think you can run a city?" Gregory's jaw tightened, but he kept his composure. "I may not have had the privileges you've enjoyed, Mr. Hayes," he replied, his voice calm but firm. "But I know what it's like to struggle. I know what it's like to be invisible in a system designed to ignore people like me. And that makes me more qualified to lead than someone who's only ever seen the world from the top." The audience erupted in applause, catching Richard off guard. It was a turning point. People began to see Gregory not as a homeless man trying to punch above his weight, but as someone who genuinely understood their struggles. Gregory's campaign was unconventional. Lacking the funds for flashy ads, he relied on door-to-door canvassing and community meetings. He shared his vision for Meadowbrook: affordable housing, better job opportunities, and a focus on education. He spoke plainly, without the polished rhetoric that people had grown tired of hearing from politicians like Richard. One rainy evening, Gregory visited a run-down neighborhood on the edge of town. He knocked on doors, speaking to families who had long felt abandoned by the system. One woman, Clara Ramirez, opened her door hesitantly. She was a single mother of 3, struggling to make ends meet. "I don't vote," she said flatly when Gregory introduced himself. "Politicians don't care about people like me." Gregory nodded. "I understand why you feel that way, Clara. But I'm not here to make empty promises. I've been where you are. I know how hard it is to get up every day and fight for your family." Clara stared at him, her expression softening. "You really think you can change things?" "I know I can," Gregory replied. "But I can't do it alone. I need people like you to believe in this fight with me." By the end of their conversation, Clara agreed to register to vote. Stories like hers fueled Gregory's determination. Meanwhile, Richard was growing desperate. His approval ratings were slipping, and whispers of corruption were beginning to surface. Gregory's team had uncovered evidence of Richard misusing city funds, but releasing it would be risky without solid proof. Richard, sensing the danger, decided to strike first. A week before the election, a smear campaign against Gregory flooded local media. Fake stories painted Gregory as a criminal, claiming he had been involved in theft during his time on the streets. The accusations stung, but Gregory refused to let them derail his campaign. He called a press conference to address the rumors head-on. "I won't stand here and pretend my past is perfect," Gregory said, his voice steady. "But I've never stolen from anyone. The only crime I've committed is believing in a system that's let me and so many others down." The honesty resonated with voters. The smear campaign backfired, making Richard look even more out of touch. Election day was a roller coaster. Gregory's grassroots movement had mobilized thousands of voters who had never participated in an election before. Richard, on the other hand, relied on his wealthy donors and long-standing connections. The results were close, but in the end, Gregory's authenticity prevailed. Back at City Hall, Gregory walked into his new office for the first time. The room was cold, the air heavy with the scent of stale coffee and politics. On the desk was a stack of documents, each one a reminder of the challenges ahead. He sat down and stared at the city map pinned to the wall. It was divided into districts, each one representing a different story, a different struggle. Gregory's mind raced with ideas, but he knew change wouldn't come easy. The sound of footsteps interrupted his thoughts. Martha Jennings entered, holding a folder. "Congratulations, Mayor Carter," she said with a smile. "You've earned this." Gregory nodded, though he couldn't shake the feeling that Richard wasn't done with him yet. "Thanks, Martha. What's next?" She placed the folder on the desk. "This is just the beginning. We've got a lot of work to do." Gregory opened the folder, his eyes scanning the first page. It was a report on the city's budget, a tangled mess of mismanagement and shady dealings. He frowned. Martha hesitated. "You need to be careful, Gregory. Richard still has influence. If he feels cornered, he might try to undermine you." Gregory leaned back in his chair, his expression hardening. "Let him try. I've been underestimated my whole life. I'm not afraid of him." But deep down, he knew the battle was far from over. Richard Hayes wasn't the type to walk away quietly. And Gregory's past, though he had embraced it, still made him vulnerable. What Gregory didn't know was that Richard was already plotting his next move, a move that would threaten everything Gregory had worked for. The air in City Hall felt heavy with tension, as though the building itself was holding its breath. Gregory had no idea that the next challenge was already on its way, and this one would cut deeper than anything he'd faced before. The phone rang late into the night, its sharp sound breaking the silence of Gregory's office. He reached for it with a tired hand, balancing the receiver against his ear as he continued flipping through the budget report. "Mayor Carter," he said, his voice edged with exhaustion. "Gregory," came Martha's voice, low and urgent. "You need to see this. Turn on Channel 7. Now." Gregory frowned, but didn't question her tone. Reaching for the small television on the corner of his desk, he flicked it on. The screen crackled to life, and there on the evening news was Richard Hayes standing in front of a podium. "Deeply concerned about the integrity of our city," Richard was saying, his tone somber. "It's come to my attention that the newly elected mayor, Gregory Carter, has a history of violence that he has failed to disclose to the public." Gregory's stomach tightened. What was Richard playing at now? The screen shifted to a grainy video clip. It showed Gregory years ago, in a heated argument with another man on the street. The video was shaky, clearly filmed on a phone, but the confrontation looked intense. At one point, Gregory shoved the man, and the video cut out. "This is the man now running our city," Richard continued, his voice dripping with feigned concern. "A man with a violent past who cannot be trusted to lead." Gregory stared at the screen, his heart pounding. He remembered the incident vividly. It had been years ago, during one of his lowest moments. The man in the video had been a drug dealer harassing a young homeless boy. Gregory had intervened, and while the situation had escalated, it hadn't gone beyond a few shouts and a shove. But context didn't matter now. The damage was done. By morning, the story was everywhere. Headlines screamed, "Violent Mayor? Carter's dark past exposed." Social media erupted with debates, some defending Gregory while others called for his resignation. Gregory's phone buzzed non-stop with calls and messages, but he ignored them. Martha walked into his office, her expression grim. "We need to get ahead of this," she said, placing a newspaper on his desk. "Richard is trying to discredit you, and it's working." Gregory ran a hand over his face, the weight of the situation pressing down on him. "What do we do? If I try to explain, it'll look like I'm making excuses." Martha nodded. "True. But staying silent makes it worse. You need to address this head-on, just like you did with the smear campaign." Gregory hesitated. "What if it's not enough?" Martha's gaze softened. "You've been through worse, Gregory. Don't let him win." Later that day, Gregory called a press conference. The room was packed with reporters, their cameras flashing as he approached the podium. He took a deep breath before speaking. "2 years ago, I was living on the streets," he began, his voice steady but firm. "I've never hidden that part of my story. But what you saw in that video doesn't tell the whole truth." He paused, scanning the room. The man in the video was threatening a young boy. "I stepped in to protect him, and yes, things got heated. But I will never apologize for standing up for someone who couldn't stand up for themselves." The room murmured with whispers, some reporters nodding, others furiously scribbling notes. "Richard Hayes wants you to believe that I'm unfit to lead because of my past. But let me remind you, he's the one who spent years ignoring the people of this city while lining his own pockets. I'm here to fix what he broke, and I won't let his lies stop me." The speech was bold, and while it didn't erase the controversy, It helped shift the narrative. People began to see Richard's tactics for what they were, desperate attempts to cling to relevance. Meanwhile, Richard was far from finished. His team leaked more evidence to the press, including fabricated claims that Gregory had once been arrested for theft. Gregory and his team scrambled to debunk the lies, but the constant attacks were taking a toll. One night, as Gregory sat in his office, the exhaustion finally caught up to him. He rested his head on the desk, wondering if he had made a mistake by running for mayor. Was it worth it? Could he really make a difference, or would Richard succeed in destroying him? His thoughts were interrupted by a knock at the door. It was Clara Ramirez, the single mother he had met during his campaign. She held a casserole dish in her hands, her face warm with gratitude. "I heard what they're saying about you," she said, placing the dish on his desk. "And I don't believe a word of it. You've already done more for this town than Richard Hayes ever did. Don't let him win." Her words reignited a spark in Gregory. He wasn't just fighting for himself, he was fighting for people like Clara, for the town that had put its trust in him. The days that followed were a whirlwind of damage control and planning. Gregory's team launched a counteroffensive, highlighting Richard's history of corruption and misuse of city funds. The tide began to turn, but the fight was far from over. One evening, as Gregory was leaving City Hall, he noticed a shadowy figure lingering near his car. He tensed, his instincts kicking in. The figure stepped into the light, revealing a man in a black suit. "Mayor Carter," the man said, his voice low and gravelly. "We need to talk." Gregory frowned. "Who are you?" The man handed him a sealed envelope. "Let's just say I represent some very interested parties. What you do with this information could change everything." Gregory opened the envelope cautiously. Inside were documents, bank statements, emails, and contracts, detailing a web of illegal activities tied directly to Richard Hayes. His heart raced as he skimmed the pages. This was the proof they needed to take Richard down once and for all. But the question lingered: who was this man, and why was he helping Gregory? Before Gregory could ask, the man disappeared into the night, leaving only his cryptic words behind. Gregory clutched the envelope, knowing this was the next step in his fight, but it also raised more questions than answers. The battle was about to escalate, and Gregory had no choice but to face it head-on. Gregory sat in his office, the envelope spread out before him. The evidence inside was explosive: bank statements showing Richard Hayes funneling city funds into offshore accounts, emails outlining bribes from developers, and contracts signed under questionable circumstances. This was the kind of proof that could not only ruin Richard's career but also lead to criminal charges. But there was a catch. Gregory couldn't ignore the mystery surrounding the man who had delivered the envelope. Why had this stranger handed him such damning evidence? And why now? The timing seemed too convenient, almost as if Gregory were being set up for something bigger. Martha entered the room, her brow furrowed. "You called?" she asked, eyeing the papers on the desk. Gregory gestured to the documents. "Take a look at this." Martha sat down, her eyes widening as she flipped through the pages. This is a gold mine. Where did you get it?" "A man showed up outside City Hall and handed it to me," Gregory replied. "Said he represented interested parties. Then he disappeared." Martha frowned. "That's suspicious. Whoever he is, he clearly has an agenda. We need to be careful." Gregory nodded. "I know. But if this is real, we can finally take Richard down. The question is, do we go public with it now or dig deeper?" Martha leaned back in her chair, thinking. "If we go public too soon, Richard will claim it's fabricated. We need to verify everything and figure out who's behind this. Otherwise, it could backfire." Gregory agreed, but the pressure was mounting. The media was still buzzing with Richard's accusations, and the public's patience was wearing thin. Gregory needed a win, and he needed it fast. That evening, Gregory met with his inner circle: Martha, Clara Ramirez, and a few other trusted allies. Together, they pored over the documents, cross-referencing the information with public records. What they found was damning. Richard had embezzled millions from the city, using shell companies to cover his tracks. Clara, who had become one of Gregory's most vocal supporters, slammed her hand on the table. "This man has been stealing from us for years while pretending to care about this city. We can't let him get away with this." Gregory nodded. "Agreed. But we need to be smart about how we use this. If we rush, he'll find a way to spin it." Martha spoke up. We should bring in someone from outside Meadowbrook. A journalist or investigator who can verify the documents and expose Richard without it looking like a personal attack. It was a solid plan, and Gregory decided to act on it. He reached out to a renowned investigative journalist named Diane Harper, who had a reputation for uncovering political scandals. Diane agreed to meet with him, intrigued by the evidence he claimed to have. The next day, Gregory sat across from Diane in a quiet cafe on the edge of town. She was sharp-eyed and direct, wasting no time on pleasantries. "You've got my attention, Mr. Carter," she said, sipping her coffee. "Let's see what you've got." Gregory handed her the envelope, watching as she carefully examined the contents. Her expression shifted from curiosity to astonishment as she realized the magnitude of what she was holding. "This is big," she said finally. "If it checks out, it could destroy Richard Hayes." Gregory nodded. "That's the idea. But I need to know, why would someone give this to me? It feels too easy." Diane leaned back, considering his words. "Politics is messy. Whoever gave you this probably has their own reasons. Maybe they want Richard out of the way for their own gain. Or maybe they genuinely want justice. Either way, your job is to make sure the truth comes out." Gregory felt a mix of relief and apprehension. Diane's involvement added credibility to the investigation, but it also raised the stakes. If this went wrong, it could end his career, and worse, it could destroy the trust he had worked so hard to build with the people of Meadowbrook. Over the next few weeks, Diane dove into the evidence, uncovering even more dirt on Richard. She connected the dots between his shady deals and the struggles of Meadowbrook's poorest neighborhoods. Richard's greed had robbed the city of funds that could have gone toward affordable housing, better schools, and job programs. Diane's article was scathing, and when it hit the front page of a national newspaper, it sent shockwaves through the town. The headline read, "Mayoral Corruption, Richard Hayes' Web of Deceit." The fallout was immediate. Protesters gathered outside Richard's mansion, demanding his resignation. News crews camped outside City Hall, eager for a statement from Gregory. But Gregory wasn't celebrating yet. He knew Richard wouldn't go down without a fight. Late one night, Gregory received a call from an unknown number. He hesitated before answering. "Hello. You think you've won, don't you?" Richard's voice was cold and venomous. "Enjoy your moment, Carter. It won't last." Gregory's grip on the phone tightened. "The truth is out, Richard. You can't talk your way out of this." Richard laughed, the sound chilling. "You're naive if you think this ends with an article. You have no idea who you're up against." The line went dead, leaving Gregory with a sinking feeling in his chest. He stared at the phone, his mind racing. Richard's words weren't empty threats, they were a warning. Gregory realized that while the public might be turning against Richard, the man still had powerful allies. Allies who wouldn't hesitate to protect their interests, even if it meant coming after Gregory. The next morning, Gregory arrived at City Hall to find his office ransacked. Papers were strewn across the floor, and his computer was missing. The message was clear: someone wanted him to back off. Martha rushed in, her face pale. "Are you okay? What happened?" Gregory shook his head. "Someone's trying to intimidate me." Martha's expression hardened. "You need to be careful, Gregory. If Richard's allies are involved, this could get dangerous." Gregory clenched his fists, anger bubbling beneath the surface. He had worked too hard to back down now. Whoever was behind this, they had underestimated him. But as he stared at the chaos in his office, Gregory couldn't shake the feeling that the fight was about to get even more personal. Gregory stood in the middle of his ransacked office, taking in the destruction. His hands trembled, but not from fear, from anger. This wasn't just an attack on him. It was a message to anyone who dared to challenge the status quo. Martha knelt by his overturned desk, picking up scattered papers. "We should call the police," she said, her voice shaky but resolute. Gregory shook his head. "And tell them what? That Richard's allies broke in?" "We don't have proof, Martha. All we'll get is a report and a lot of questions." "You can't let this slide," she pressed. "If they think you'll back down, they'll keep pushing." Gregory's jaw tightened. "I'm not backing down. But I'm not playing their game, either. If they think they can scare me into silence, they're wrong." Martha gave him a worried look but didn't argue. She knew Gregory well enough to understand that once he made up his mind, there was no changing it. That afternoon, Gregory held a press conference in front of City Hall. The damage to his office hadn't been publicized yet, but Gregory knew it wouldn't stay quiet for long. He decided to get ahead of the story. "Good afternoon," he began, his voice steady as cameras clicked and reporters jotted down notes. "As you all know, Meadowbrook is at a crossroads. For years, this city has been held hostage by corruption and greed. My administration is committed to ending that." He paused, letting his words sink in. "But not everyone wants to see change. This morning, my office was broken into and vandalized. While I won't speculate on who's responsible, I will say this: I will not be intimidated. The people of Meadowbrook deserve a government that works for them, not against them. And I will do everything in my power to deliver that." The crowd erupted in applause, but Gregory knew the fight was far from over. The press conference might rally support, but it wouldn't stop whoever was behind the attack. Later that evening, Gregory met with Diane Harper to discuss the next steps. The journalist was as composed as ever, but Gregory could see the concern in her eyes. "You're making enemies, Gregory," Diane said, sipping her coffee. "Powerful ones. Whoever ransacked your office didn't do it on a whim. They want to send a message." Gregory leaned forward, his expression grim. "Then let's send one back. Your article exposed Richard's corruption, but there's more to this. He couldn't have done it alone. I want to know who's backing him." Diane nodded, a faint smile tugging at her lips. "I was hoping you'd say that. I've been digging into his network, and I've found some interesting connections. Developers, lobbyists, even a few state-level politicians. They all have something to lose if you succeed." Gregory's chest tightened. He had suspected as much, but hearing it confirmed made the stakes feel even higher. "What do we do?" "We keep digging," Diane said. "But you need to be prepared. These people won't go down quietly." The next few weeks were a whirlwind of investigations and public appearances. Diane's team uncovered more evidence linking Richard to a network of shady figures who had profited off Meadowbrook's decline. Each revelation brought more public outrage, but it also brought more resistance. One night, as Gregory drove home, he noticed a black SUV following him. At first, he thought it might be a coincidence, but the SUV stayed on his tail through multiple turns. His heart raced as he realized he was being followed. Gregory's mind raced. Should he confront them? Call the police? He decided to test their persistence, driving in circles around his neighborhood. The SUV stayed close, its headlights glaring in his rearview mirror. Finally, Gregory pulled into a well-lit gas station, hoping the presence of witnesses would deter whoever was following him. The SUV slowed but didn't stop, disappearing into the night. Gregory sat in his car, his hands gripping the steering wheel as he tried to steady his breathing. He couldn't ignore it anymore. Richard's allies weren't just playing dirty politics. They were escalating to something far more dangerous. The next morning, Gregory arrived at City Hall to find a package waiting for him. It was unmarked, but his gut told him it wasn't a friendly delivery. He opened it cautiously, revealing a single photograph. It was a picture of him, taken the previous night at the gas station. On the back of the photo, someone had scrawled 3 words in thick black ink: "You're being watched." Gregory's stomach dropped. He immediately called Martha and Diane, showing them the photo when they arrived. "This isn't just intimidation anymore," Martha said, her voice shaking. "This is a threat." Diane studied the photo, her expression unreadable. "They're trying to rattle you, Gregory. They want you to make a mistake." Gregory clenched his fists. "Well, they've failed. If anything, this just proves we're getting too close to the truth. We need to push harder." Martha looked at him, her eyes filled with concern. "Gregory, I admire your determination, but you need to think about your safety. If they're willing to go this far, what's stopping them from going further?" Gregory nodded, but inside, his anger was boiling over. He wasn't going to let fear dictate his actions. Whoever was behind this, they were about to learn that Gregory Carter wasn't someone who could be bullied into submission. That evening, Gregory held another meeting with his team. They decided to focus their efforts on tracing the money trail connected to Richard's allies. If they could expose the full scope of the corruption, it would force state and federal authorities to intervene. But as the meeting ended and Gregory walked to his car, he couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching him. The shadows seemed darker, the silence heavier. And then, as he reached his car, he saw it, a red dot dancing on his chest. A sniper's laser. Before he could react, Martha screamed from the doorway of City Hall. "Gregory! Get down!" Gregory dropped to the ground as a gunshot shattered the night. Chaos erupted as his team scrambled for cover. Tires screeched in the distance as the would-be assassin fled the scene. Gregory's heart pounded as he lay on the cold pavement, his mind racing. This wasn't just about politics anymore. His life was on the line, and the fight for Meadowbrook had just taken a deadly turn. The flashing red and blue lights of police cars bathed the City Hall parking lot. Officers swarmed the scene, their radios crackling with orders. Gregory sat on the curb, his chest still heaving from the close call. Martha knelt beside him, gripping his arm tightly. "You're okay," she said, her voice trembling. "You're okay." Gregory nodded, though his hands were still shaking. "They're not trying to scare me anymore. They want me gone." Detective Marcus Hall approached, a burly man with a no-nonsense demeanor. He crouched down to Gregory's level, his expression serious. "Mayor Carter, we've secured the area, but the shooter is long gone. Did you see anything?" Gregory shook his head. "Just the laser on my chest. Then the shot. I didn't see who it was or where it came from." Hall scribbled in his notebook, his jaw tightening. "We'll review security footage and see what we can find. In the meantime, I suggest you take some precautions. Stay in well-lit areas, avoid going anywhere alone, and consider hiring private security." Gregory's stomach churned. The idea of needing bodyguards just to do his job felt surreal, but he knew Hall was right. Later that night, Gregory sat in his dimly lit living room, replaying the events in his mind. The bullet hadn't just grazed him physically, it had shaken his resolve. For the first time since he began his fight against Richard Hayes, doubt crept in. "Gregory." Martha's voice broke through his thoughts. She stood in the doorway, holding 2 mugs of tea. "You need to rest." He took the mug with a weak smile. "I can't sleep, Martha. Not after tonight. Whoever did this, they won't stop." Martha sat beside him, her gaze steady. "Then we won't stop either. You're not alone in this, Gregory. We're all in it together." Her words gave him a sliver of hope, but the weight of the situation remained heavy. Gregory knew he couldn't let fear paralyze him. If anything, the attempt on his life only solidified his resolve. The next morning, Diane Harper arrived with urgent news. "I traced some of the money trail we've been following," she said, laying out documents on Gregory's desk. "It all leads back to a shell company called Pinebridge Holdings. It's registered offshore, but the interesting part is the board of directors." Gregory scanned the names, his eyes narrowing as he reached the last one. "Stephen Cole." Diane nodded. "He's a state senator and a close ally of Richard Hayes. If he's involved, it explains a lot. Richard wasn't just embezzling funds, he was funneling them into projects that benefited his powerful friends." Gregory leaned back in his chair, his mind racing. "This isn't just about Meadowbrook anymore. This is a statewide operation." Diane smirked. "Exactly. And if we can prove it, we'll blow this thing wide open." But Gregory knew exposing a state senator would be dangerous. Stephen Cole wasn't just powerful, he was ruthless. Taking him down would require undeniable evidence and airtight strategy. Over the next few days, Gregory's team worked tirelessly to gather more information. They uncovered contracts linking Pinebridge Holdings to Meadowbrook's biggest construction projects, all of which had gone over budget with little to show for it. The money trail painted a clear picture of corruption, but they needed a whistleblower to bring it to life. Their break came when a former city contractor named Joe Daniels contacted Gregory's office. Joe had worked on one of the projects tied to Pinebridge Holdings, and he had stories to tell. Gregory met Joe in a small diner on the outskirts of town. The man was nervous, glancing over his shoulder every few seconds. "You're safe here," Gregory assured him. "Just tell me what you know." Joe took a deep breath. "I worked on the East Meadow housing project. It was supposed to be affordable housing, but it was a sham. We barely built anything. Most of the money went into the pockets of Hayes and his people." "Why come forward now?" Gregory asked. Joe hesitated, his hands trembling. "Because I can't live with it anymore. People are suffering, and it's partly my fault. But if I talk, they'll come after me." "They've already come after me," Gregory said, his voice firm. "But we can't let them win. If you help us, we'll protect you." Joe nodded, though fear still lingered in his eyes. "Okay. I'll tell you everything." Joe's testimony was the missing piece Gregory's team needed. With his accounts and the documents Diane had uncovered, They built a case so strong it couldn't be ignored. Diane prepared a bombshell exposé, set to publish in one of the country's largest newspapers. But as the publication date approached, the threats escalated. Gregory received anonymous calls warning him to back off. His car was tampered with, forcing him to walk to City Hall one morning. Even Joe reported strange cars parked outside his house. Gregory's team gathered for a late-night meeting, the tension palpable. "They're scared," Diane said, her tone defiant. "That means we're getting close." "But they're getting desperate," Martha countered. "Desperate people do dangerous things." Gregory listened, his gaze fixed on the city map pinned to the wall. "We don't stop. If we back down now, they'll win, and everything we've worked for will mean nothing." The morning of the exposé's release, Gregory woke to the sound of his phone buzzing incessantly. He groggily reached for it and saw a flood of missed calls and messages. One from Diane stood out. "We have a problem. Call me ASAP." His heart sank as he dialed her number. She answered on the first ring, her voice frantic. "Gregory, someone hacked the newspaper's servers." The article was pulled before it could go live. Gregory felt like the air had been knocked out of him. "What? How?" "They must have had someone on the inside," Diane said. "But that's not the worst of it. They've released a counterstory, claiming you fabricated the evidence to cover up your own corruption." Gregory's blood ran cold. "What? That's absurd." "It doesn't matter," Diane said. "They're controlling the narrative now. If we don't act fast, this could destroy everything." Gregory stared out the window, his mind racing. The fight wasn't just about exposing the truth anymore, it was about survival. And he knew the next move would have to be bold enough to outmaneuver enemies far more cunning and ruthless than he had ever imagined. The air was thick with tension as Gregory's team gathered in his office. Diane Harper paced the room, her frustration evident. Martha sat stiffly in her chair, her worry etched into every line of her face. Gregory leaned against his desk, his arms crossed, trying to process the chaos unfolding around him. "They're outmaneuvering us," Diane said, breaking the silence. "Hacking the newspaper? Planting fake stories? This isn't amateur work. They've got serious resources." Gregory shook his head. "We can't let them control the narrative. If we let this story stick, it's over." Martha spoke up, her voice steady but grim. "What's our move, Gregory? If we keep chasing their attacks, we'll never get ahead." Gregory considered her words, his mind racing. The exposé had been their trump card, but now it felt like they were back at square one. He thought of Joe Daniels, the whistleblower whose testimony had solidified their case. Joe's courage reminded Gregory why he couldn't give up, no matter how insurmountable the odds seemed. "We go public," Gregory said finally. "Not through the usual channels. We'll hold a town hall and live stream it. No middlemen, no filters. Just us and the people." Diane raised an eyebrow. "You're proposing we bypass traditional media?" Gregory nodded. "The people of Meadowbrook elected me because they believed I'd fight for them. It's time I prove I'm still in their corner." Over the next 2 days, Gregory's team worked tirelessly to organize the town hall. Flyers went up around the city, and social media buzzed with the announcement. The event promised a direct conversation with Mayor Carter, and curiosity spread quickly. Richard Hayes and his allies caught wind of the event, and Gregory expected retaliation. On the morning of the town hall, a new wave of attacks hit. Fake social media accounts flooded platforms with doctored images of Gregory signing shady contracts. Anonymous calls spread rumors of financial misconduct. It was a coordinated effort to discredit him before he could speak. But Gregory didn't flinch. The more they pushed, the more determined he became. That evening, the town hall was packed. The auditorium buzzed with anticipation as people filed in, filling every seat and spilling into the aisles. Gregory stood backstage, adjusting his tie. His heart pounded, but he steadied himself with a deep breath. "You've got this," Martha said, placing a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "Just tell the truth. They'll see through the lies." Gregory nodded. "Thanks, Martha." When he stepped onto the stage, the room erupted in applause. He scanned the crowd, seeing faces filled with hope, skepticism, and everything in between. The live stream was already rolling, broadcasting the event to thousands more online. Gregory approached the microphone, gripping it firmly. "Good evening," he began. "Thank you for being here tonight. I called this meeting because the people of Meadowbrook deserve the truth. No spin. No distractions. Just the truth. The room fell silent, the tension palpable. Gregory took another deep breath before continuing. For weeks, we've been investigating corruption in our city, corruption that goes far beyond Richard Hayes. We've uncovered evidence of embezzlement, backroom deals, and misuse of public funds. These crimes have stolen from you, the people of Meadowbrook. Gasps rippled through the crowd, but Gregory pressed on. My team has collected documents, whistleblower testimony, and financial records. This evidence is irrefutable, and we're preparing to submit it to state and federal authorities. Applause erupted, but Gregory held up a hand, signaling for silence. But there's more you need to know. Since we began this fight, my team and I have faced relentless attacks, attempts to silence us, discredit us, and even threats against our lives. Just days ago, someone hacked into a national newspaper to suppress our story. The crowd murmured in shock, but Gregory wasn't finished. These aren't random acts of sabotage. They're the work of powerful people who want to keep you in the dark. People like Senator Stephen Cole, a man who has profited from your struggles while pretending to fight for you. The room erupted, some people shouting in outrage while others sat stunned. Gregory felt the weight of his words, but he knew he couldn't hold back. I'm telling you this because I need your help. This isn't just my fight, it's ours. If we stand together, we can expose the truth and rebuild our city. But if we let fear win, nothing will change. As Gregory finished, the audience rose to their feet, their applause thunderous. But amidst the cheers, Gregory noticed a man slipping out of the auditorium. He was wearing a suit, his movements hurried. Gregory's gut told him the man was no ordinary attendee. After the event, Gregory and Martha reviewed the live stream comments. Most were supportive, but a few stood out. Anonymous users posted veiled threats, warning Gregory to drop the act and remember what happened last time. They're doubling down, Martha said, her brow furrowed. They're not going to let this go. Gregory nodded. Good. Neither am I. The next morning, Gregory's office received an unexpected visit. 2 FBI agents introduced themselves, flashing their badges. Mayor Carter, one of them said, his tone professional but urgent. We've been monitoring your investigation into Senator Cole and Richard Hayes. We need to talk. Gregory's pulse quickened. Come in, he said, leading them to his office. The agents explained that they had been building a case against Cole for months, but Gregory's team's findings had accelerated their timeline. Your work has been invaluable, one agent said. But it's also made you a target. Gregory nodded grimly. I'm well aware. The agents exchanged a glance. We're here to protect you, Mayor Carter. But we also need your help. If you're willing to testify, we can bring this operation down. The weight of their words hung heavy in the air. Testifying would put Gregory in even greater danger, but it could also be the final blow against the corruption he had fought so hard to expose. I'll do it, Gregory said, his voice firm. But I want to make one thing clear, I'm not backing down, no matter what they throw at me. The agents nodded, their respect evident. We'll make sure you're ready, Mayor Carter. But be prepared, things are about to get even more intense. Gregory sat back, his mind racing. The fight was far from over, and the stakes had never been higher. But he knew one thing for certain, he was ready for whatever came next. Gregory adjusted his tie as he prepared to step into the federal courthouse. The weight of the moment pressed down on him, but his resolve remained firm. Testifying against Senator Stephen Cole and Richard Hayes was not just about exposing corruption, it was about reclaiming Meadowbrook for the people who had been robbed of their trust. 2 FBI agents flanked him as he walked through the courthouse doors. The building buzzed with reporters and onlookers, cameras flashing as Gregory passed. Some shouted questions, others simply watched, their expressions a mix of curiosity and hope. Martha met him inside, her face pale but determined. Are you ready for this? She asked, her voice low. Gregory nodded. I've been ready since the day Richard Hayes cheated me. This is our moment, Martha. We can't back down now. She gave him a small smile. Good. Let's make history. The courtroom was tense as Gregory took the stand. Lawyers for Senator Cole and Richard Hayes sat at one table, their expressions cold and calculating. On the opposite side, federal prosecutors prepared their questions. The judge, a stern woman with sharp eyes, called the room to order. Mayor Gregory Carter, the prosecutor began, addressing him directly. "Thank you for being here today. Can you tell us, in your own words, what led to your investigation into Richard Hayes and Senator Stephen Cole?" Gregory took a deep breath, steadying himself. "It started with Richard Hayes' misuse of public funds during his tenure as mayor of Meadowbrook. My team uncovered financial records linking him to shell companies, including one tied to Senator Cole. These funds were meant for city projects, but were instead diverted for personal gain." The prosecutor nodded. "And did you encounter any resistance or threats during your investigation?" "Yes," Gregory replied, his voice steady. "There were attempts to discredit me, including fabricated allegations and a smear campaign. My office was ransacked, my life was threatened, and someone even attempted to assassinate me." Gasps rippled through the courtroom. The defense team exchanged nervous glances, their confidence waning. The prosecutor handed Gregory a document. "Can you confirm that this is one of the financial records your team uncovered?" Gregory reviewed the document and nodded. "Yes, this is a contract linking Pinebridge Holdings to the East Meadow housing project. The money allocated for the project was never used to complete it. Instead, it was funneled into private accounts connected to Richard Hayes and Senator Cole." The prosecutor presented more evidence, each piece meticulously linking the defendants to the corruption. Gregory answered every question clearly and confidently, his testimony painting a damning picture of greed and betrayal. When the defense had their turn to cross-examine, they tried to undermine Gregory's credibility. "Mayor Carter," one defense lawyer began, his tone sharp, "you've admitted to having a troubled past, including time spent homeless. How do we know you're not fabricating these claims for personal revenge?" Gregory met the lawyer's gaze, unflinching. "My past doesn't discredit me, it defines me. I've lived through the consequences of corruption and neglect. That's why I fought so hard to uncover the truth. And as for these claims, the evidence speaks for itself." The lawyer scowled, clearly frustrated. He moved on to another line of questioning, but the damage had already been done. Gregory's composure and honesty left little room for doubt. Outside the courthouse, the atmosphere was electric. Reporters swarmed Gregory as he stepped onto the steps, their questions coming in rapid fire. "Mayor Carter, do you think your testimony will lead to convictions? Do you fear retaliation after today's hearing? What's next for Meadowbrook if the trial goes your way?" Gregory raised a hand, signaling for quiet. "Today was about holding powerful people accountable," he said, his voice strong. "No matter the outcome, my commitment to Meadowbrook remains the same. This city deserves leaders who serve its people, not their own interests." The crowd erupted in applause, but Gregory knew the battle was far from over. The hearing was just one step in a long and uncertain process. That evening, Gregory returned to City Hall, exhausted but hopeful. His office, now repaired after the earlier break-in, felt like a safe haven. Martha was waiting for him, a folder in hand. "You did good today," she said, setting the folder on his desk. "But we've got another problem." Gregory frowned. "What now?" Martha opened the folder, revealing a new set of documents. This came from an anonymous source. "It's a contract for a land development deal, signed last week." The signatures matched those of Richard Hayes and Stephen Cole. Gregory's brow furrowed. "They're still operating? Even with all this heat on them?" "Looks like it," Martha said grimly. "And the deal involves one of Meadowbrook's most vulnerable neighborhoods. If it goes through, hundreds of families will be displaced." Gregory clenched his fists. "We can't let this happen. Get Diane on the phone. We need to expose this immediately." Martha hesitated. "Gregory, we're running out of time. They're getting bolder, and every step we take puts you in more danger." Gregory met her gaze, his expression unwavering. "If we don't stop them, who will?" The next day, Gregory and Diane met to strategize. The new documents provided a clear trail, but exposing the deal would require immediate action. They decided to hold another press conference, this time with representatives from the affected neighborhood. The press conference was a success, drawing attention to the shady deal and rallying public support. But it also drew the ire of Richard's allies. That night, Gregory received a chilling phone call. "You're making a lot of noise, Carter," the voice said, low and menacing. "Maybe it's time someone shut you up for good." The line went dead, leaving Gregory staring at the phone. He knew the threats weren't idle, but he refused to back down. The fight was nearing its climax, and Gregory was determined to see it through to the end, no matter the cost. As Gregory prepared for the days ahead, a sense of foreboding settled over him. The forces against him were growing more desperate, and the next move would be theirs. But Gregory wasn't afraid. He had come too far, fought too hard, to let fear stop him now. The late-night threat lingered in Gregory's mind, but he pressed forward. The fight wasn't just about politics anymore, it was a battle for justice and survival. He had become the face of a movement, and backing down wasn't an option. The next morning, Gregory arrived at City Hall to find a large crowd gathered outside. People held signs reading, "Justice for Meadowbrook," and "We stand with Gregory." Their cheers erupted as he stepped out of his car. Martha greeted him at the entrance, a cautious smile on her face. "The people are with you," she said. "But we've got to keep the momentum going." Gregory nodded. "What's our next move?" Martha handed him a briefing. "The press conference yesterday put the new land deal under a microscope. The city council is scrambling to decide whether to approve it. If we can stop the deal before it's finalized, it'll be a major blow to Richard and Cole." Gregory glanced at the briefing, his jaw tightening. "Then we need to make sure the council hears from the people who will be affected." That evening, Gregory organized a public hearing, inviting residents of the targeted neighborhood to share their stories. The auditorium was packed, emotions running high as people spoke about the impact the land deal would have on their lives. A young mother, Angela Reed, held her baby as she addressed the council. "I've lived in Meadowbrook my whole life," she said, her voice trembling. "This is my home. If this deal goes through, where will we go? How can we afford to start over?" An elderly man, Mr. Henderson, stood next. "I fought in the war for this country," he said, his voice firm despite his age. "And now, they want to take my home to build luxury condos? It's not right." The council members shifted uncomfortably in their seats, clearly feeling the weight of the testimonies. Gregory watched, his heart swelling with pride and determination. This was the power of the people, something Richard and his allies had underestimated. Meanwhile, behind the scenes, Richard Hayes and Senator Stephen Cole were plotting their next move. In a dimly lit office, they reviewed the fallout from Gregory's press conference and the public hearing. "This Carter is becoming a real problem," Richard said, his voice laced with frustration. "If we don't neutralize him soon, he'll bring the whole operation down." Cole smirked, leaning back in his chair. "Don't worry. I've already set things in motion. By the time we're done, Carter won't just lose the public's trust, he'll lose everything." Richard raised an eyebrow. "What are you planning?" Cole slid a file across the table. "Let's just say it's a little insurance. If Carter wants to play with fire, we'll make sure he gets burned." The next day, Gregory's office received an anonymous tip that rocked his team to the core. An email chain had been leaked, allegedly showing Gregory making backroom deals with developers. The emails were fake, but they were convincing enough to make headlines. "I.S. Mayor Carter hiding his own corruption," one headline screamed. Gregory slammed the newspaper on his desk, frustration boiling over. "This is absurd. They're fabricating evidence now." Diane, who had joined him to strategize, nodded grimly. "It's classic misdirection. They're trying to make you look just as bad as they are." Martha entered the room, her expression grim. "It's already spreading on social media. People are starting to question everything." Gregory felt the weight of the accusations pressing down on him, but he refused to give in to despair. "We'll fight this," he said firmly. "Get our tech team on it. We'll trace the source of the leak and prove it's fake." As Gregory's team worked to counter the smear campaign, tensions in Meadowbrook continued to rise. Protesters supporting Gregory clashed with groups defending Richard and Cole, the city teetering on the brink of chaos. The pressure took its toll on Gregory. Late one night, he sat alone in his office, staring at the city map pinned to the wall. Every district represented a story, a struggle, a reason he had fought so hard to make a difference. But now, it felt like the walls were closing in. Martha found him there, her voice soft as she approached. "Gregory, you can't carry this alone." He looked up at her, his exhaustion evident. "I'm not sure I have a choice." "You're not alone," she said firmly. "The people are behind you, and so are we. Don't let them take that away from you." Her words rekindled his resolve. Gregory knew the fight wasn't just about him, it was about everyone who had placed their trust in him. The breakthrough came 2 days later. Diane's team traced the fake emails to a PR firm with ties to Senator Cole. The evidence was irrefutable, and Diane wasted no time exposing the scheme in a new article. The revelation shifted public opinion back in Gregory's favor, but the damage had been done. Trust was shaken, and Gregory knew his enemies wouldn't stop there. That night, as Gregory drove home, he noticed a black SUV trailing him. His heart raced, the memory of the earlier assassination attempt flashing in his mind. He turned onto a side street, hoping to lose them, but the SUV stayed close. Finally, Gregory pulled into a crowded gas station, hoping the presence of witnesses would deter whoever was following him. The SUV slowed but didn't stop, its windows dark and ominous. Gregory watched as it drove past, disappearing into the night. His phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. "Stay out of our way, or you won't be so lucky next time." Gregory stared at the message, his mind racing. The battle was escalating, and his enemies were growing more desperate. But Gregory was more determined than ever to see this fight through, no matter the cost. The next morning, Gregory received a call from the FBI. The agent's voice was urgent. "Mayor Carter, we've uncovered a new development. It looks like Cole and Hayes are planning to accelerate their operations. We need you to come in immediately." Gregory's pulse quickened. What kind of operation? The agent hesitated. "Something that could devastate Meadowbrook if it goes through. We'll brief you when you get here." As Gregory ended the call, he felt the weight of the moment pressing down on him. The stakes had never been higher, and the fight was hurtling toward a dangerous climax. Gregory stepped into the FBI's regional office, his heart pounding. The urgency in the agent's voice during their earlier call left little doubt. This was a pivotal moment in the fight against Richard Hayes and Senator Stephen Cole. Agent Marcus Hall greeted him in the conference room, his expression grim. A large screen displayed maps, charts, and a timeline of events connected to Cole and Hayes. "Mayor Carter," Hall began, gesturing for Gregory to sit, "we've confirmed that Cole and Hayes are expediting a project that could cause irreparable harm to Meadowbrook. They've secured permits for a large-scale development on protected wetlands just outside the city." Gregory's stomach dropped. The wetlands? That area protects us from flooding. Without it, the lower neighborhoods could be wiped out in heavy rain. "Exactly," Hall said, nodding. "And the worst part? They're rushing the deal through under the guise of emergency housing development. But our investigation shows they've already made plans to sell the land to a private luxury developer." Gregory's jaw tightened. "They're not just stealing money, they're endangering lives." Hall handed Gregory a folder. "This is everything we've uncovered so far. We're preparing to take action, but we'll need your help. Your testimony and public platform can amplify the pressure and prevent this deal from going through." Gregory took the folder, scanning its contents. It was damning evidence, contracts, emails, and bank transfers that painted a clear picture of greed and corruption. But bringing it to light would come with immense risks. "I'll do it," Gregory said, his voice steady. "Whatever it takes." The following day, Gregory called an emergency town meeting. Word spread quickly, and by evening, the city's largest auditorium was packed. The atmosphere was electric. People were angry, determined, and ready for answers. Gregory stood at the podium, the FBI documents displayed on a screen behind him. "I called you here tonight because Meadowbrook is under attack, not from outsiders, but from people who have sworn to serve and protect us." He pointed to the documents on the screen. "Senator Stephen Cole and Richard Hayes have conspired to sell protected wetlands to private developers. This isn't just about money, it's about the safety of our city. If this deal goes through, our most vulnerable neighborhoods will face catastrophic flooding." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Gregory continued, his voice rising with conviction. "We have the power to stop this. But it will take all of us standing together, demanding accountability, and refusing to let these men destroy our city for their own gain." The crowd erupted in applause, their voices a chorus of determination. Gregory felt a swell of hope, but he knew the fight wasn't over. As the meeting ended, Gregory received a text from Diane Harper. "We need to meet. Now. Urgent." Gregory left the auditorium and headed to Diane's office. She was waiting for him, her expression tense. "We've got a problem," she said, handing him a printout. "One of my sources inside Cole's camp leaked this to me. It's a plan to discredit you, again. But this time, they're going after your family." Gregory froze, his mind racing. "My family? I don't have any immediate family. They're digging into your past, looking for anything they can use," Diane explained. "It's their way of trying to destabilize you." Gregory clenched his fists. "Let them dig. I've been honest about my past. They won't find anything I haven't already faced. Diane nodded, but her worry was evident. Just be careful. They're desperate, and desperate people are dangerous. The next morning, Gregory's team received another blow. A prominent TV network aired a segment claiming Gregory had been involved in a violent altercation during his homeless years. The segment featured a man claiming Gregory had assaulted him over a dispute at a shelter. Gregory's team scrambled to respond, but the accusation spread quickly, sowing doubt among some of his supporters. At a press conference later that day, Gregory addressed the claims head-on. "These accusations are false," he said firmly. "They're part of a coordinated effort to distract from the real issue, corruption that threatens our city. I've faced hardships in my life, and I've made mistakes, but I've always fought for what's right. I won't let lies stop me from protecting Meadowbrook." The response was mixed. Many rallied behind Gregory, but the relentless attacks from Cole and Hayes chipped away at his momentum. That evening, Gregory received a chilling message. A note was slipped under his office door, written in block letters. "This is your last warning. Stop or pay the price." Gregory stared at the note, his mind racing. He had faced threats before, but this felt different. It wasn't just about silencing him, it was personal. He called Martha and Diane to his office, showing them the note. "They're trying to scare me off," he said, his voice steady. "But it's not going to work." Martha's eyes filled with concern. "Gregory, you need protection. This isn't just about politics anymore, it's about your life." Gregory nodded. "The FBI's already involved. I'll let them handle the threats. But we have to stay focused. If we can stop this wetlands deal, it'll be the final blow." The showdown came a week later. Gregory and his team worked with the FBI to present their findings to state authorities. At the same time, Gregory led a peaceful protest at the site of the proposed development, drawing thousands of supporters. As the protest reached its peak, news broke. The FBI had issued indictments against Senator Cole and Richard Hayes, charging them with conspiracy, fraud, and environmental violations. The crowd erupted in cheers as the news spread. Gregory stood before the sea of supporters, a sense of relief washing over him. "This isn't just a victory for me," he said. "It's a victory for all of us, for every person who refused to give up, who stood up for what's right. This is what happens when we fight together." The crowd's cheers echoed through the air, a powerful reminder of the strength of unity. Gregory knew the fight for Meadowbrook wasn't over, but this was a turning point, a moment that proved change was possible. As he stepped off the stage, Gregory's phone buzzed with a message from Martha. "Congratulations, Mayor. You did it." Gregory smiled, his resolve stronger than ever. The road ahead would still be challenging, but he was ready to face it, because Meadowbrook was worth fighting for.